Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 46th Mill Valley Film Festival, Day 4. This is, yes, 46. We have a lot of film ahead of you, but this is a very special evening for us. We are doing the West Coast premiere of Rustin, directed by George C. Wolfe, and you can't get much better than that. We're going to have George up here in a moment, but there's a few things I'd like to do. First of all, I'm Mark Fishkin, the founder of the California Film Institute. It's my associate, Director of Programming, Zoe Elton.
Hello, everyone.
First, I would like to thank a couple of companies who have individuals behind them who are supporting us. Kaiser Permanente. In addition, Project 9. You may have heard of Project 9 in relationship to our resiliency campaign. I don't have to tell you, you've heard it from the stage, you've felt it. It's been a challenging 3 years, to use an overworked word. And we are doing the same things that we've always done, but we're doing it with $1 million less each year. And that's not a sustainable thing. But fortunately, we have sponsors and individuals and members, and all of you are very, very valuable to the sustainability of this organization. I've been thinking a lot, what a board member used to say to me. He used to say, it's not the cost of things, it's the value of them. And I would like to think that with all of our programs, the Mill Valley Film Festival, nearly here, 50 years, our Docklands Festival, our CAFILM educational program that serves during the whole year, nearly 20,000 kids we touch with that program. And when I started this festival, naively, I thought I could change the world with one film. I certainly realized that may not be possible, but we can certainly influence one mind at a time. And we do that through all these programs, from the youngest elementary school kids to everybody in this audience and your families. We do that through all the programs that we have talked about. And you know, we can make a difference. There is value there. So again, I want to thank you for your support. If you have the inclination, there's a QR code up there. And if you want to renew your membership or give an additional gift, it's certainly greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Another way you can show your appreciation for the films is by tearing number 5 on the audience ballots. I just said to Brianna, I'm going to do that. She said, yeah, tear 5. This is your way of showing appreciation to our filmmakers. And getting your responses at the ballot box really makes it, it makes a considerable difference to people. People like to know what you're feeling and thinking. Tonight is a spotlight on George C. Wolfe. So you may know George C. Wolfe as a playwright. You might know The Colored Museum, Spunk, Jelly's Last Jam. And you may well know him as the Tony Award-winning director of Angels in America, Millennium Approaches. And you also may know him for his leadership of the Public Theater in New York, which he was the artistic director of for many years. I mean, that place is just like a beacon of cultural light in our lives. And you will, of course, know that he also brings his talents to cinema. We last saw his work here as a film director in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, right? With Viola Davis, and one of the other cast members was Colman Domingo. Yeah, right? Anyway, in all of his work, he brings the vision of the consummate artist. His creative, his intellectual, and his brilliance shines through in all of his work. And he's a supreme director of actors Colman Domingo joins him again in this film as Bayard Rustin. And it's particularly moving to have this coming out in the anniversary year of the March on Washington, 60 years ago. George C. Wolfe's commitment to the art and the power of cinema is beautifully articulated in Rustin. And George C. Wolfe, I'd like to invite you to the stage.
Hello.
And we would like you to receive the Mill Valley Film Festival Award for your visionary directing.
Oh, thank you. Should I talk? No?
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here. I've never been here before. This is a beautiful theater. It really is. It's stunning, stunning, stunning. You know, you were talking about a film that could change the world. Everybody dreams of making a piece of art that's going to change the world. But the second best thing is making a film about somebody who actually did. And I love history. If I didn't do what I do, whatever it is that I do, I'm a storyteller, I guess that's what I am. But if I didn't do that, I would be a historian. But the thing which is so incredibly fascinating and interesting to me is I love history, but history is mean. History can be very mean. Bayard Rustin dedicated himself, changed the world, changed this country by being the architect of one of the most monumental events that happened in the last century. And the history decided to disregard him. In part because he was black, but then it also accelerated and made world famous because of his astonishing speech, Martin Luther King with the I Have a Dream speech. That also happened that day. But also he was gay. And he was, for the 1963 version of unapologetically gay. I mean, he was very gay. Anyway, so, and you know, he recorded an album. Okay, this is how gay he was. You know, I feel like I'm on the Johnny Carson show. How gay was he? Well, he was this and that. He recorded an album of Elizabethan songs and Negro spirituals. One person. Now that's astonishing on a couple of levels because one, it's just like ridiculous, A, but also B, he had an astonishing tenor voice, and it also exposes in an incredibly fascinating way his expansive curiosity. He was able to look at people, look at worlds, look at cultures, and find a piece of himself in them. And that's a wondrous gift. And also, I frequently label him as the ultimate American because of that curiosity. It takes, I think, to be an ultimate American, it requires an incredible degree of curiosity. Because if you don't live inside of that curiosity, frequently when you come into contact with something that you do not understand, fear takes the place of that curiosity. And then you retreat. And then you demonize. And then you keep going and going and going until they're not people at all. And Bayard was the antithesis of that. So it's really, really thrilling to share with you this film about an amazing human being, a brilliant organizer, an activist who understood the verb of activism was as important as the noun of calling yourself one. It's in the deeds, it's in the details, it's in the doing. And also, you know, and a person who had incredible wit and brilliance and is an astonishing American. And I hope you grow, if you don't already know him, and you should, but you will hopefully a little bit more after this film, I hope you grow to love him and appreciate him and value him as much as I do. And once again, thank you for this award, and thank you for having me.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Ford from Vanity Fair. Thank you for joining us tonight. I have the honor of bringing up two very special people. I'd love to start with producer Tanya Davis. Thank you. And please welcome director George C. Wolfe. So I saw this film back at Telluride, and I had about that same reaction to the experience. It really just has such a lasting impression. And I think is so powerful because many people don't know his story or don't even know about him. When did you first learn about Bayard Rustin, and when did he first sort of come into your consciousness?
I think I first learned about him in college, peripherally. And then maybe, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, I helped to create a museum in Atlanta called the Center for Civil and Human Rights. And so that's when I really dug into it. I went, oh my God, oh, who this person? Oh my God, oh my God. And that's when sort of what an astonishing human being this was. And then at one point, somebody talked to me about doing a series of documentaries, and that didn't happen. And then I got really deep into not just him, but the world at that point in time. Because my hometown was segregated for the first 8 years of my life. And so I was little, and I remember all these figures, but they were these big people. But then as I got older, I realized how young they were and how ferociously committed and brave and doing these astonishing things. So it's and then that just magnified my awe and my appreciation and understanding the drama, and then getting inside. At this point in time, this was a very interesting period because, passive resistance had been the mode of behavior, the NAACP, and Brown versus Board of Education relying on the court system, and then, but the segregationists were still saying, no, we're not doing anything, and as one of the characters points out, a law gets proposed by Truman or a law gets proposed by a president, and then the Dixiecrats would dilute it of any potency so that it had no impact. And so it was at this point in time where something had to change. And that's what became thrilling to me, that everybody was operating from a sense of urgency.
And Tanya, tell me about your awareness of his story and when this story was brought to you in Higher Ground. What was of interest?
So I was not particularly aware of Bayard Rustin until President Obama gave him the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And that piqued my interest, but I still didn't look into the story nearly as much as I could have or should have. And then when Higher Ground started, which is just about 5 years ago, like every other producer on the planet, we were looking for projects. And we were looking for projects from people who we loved and admired and wanted to work with. And Bruce Cohen, who is my producing partner on the film, and he couldn't be here tonight, but he sends his best, left me a message on my cell phone over lunch one day. And the message said, "This is Bruce Cohen. I have a project. Bayard Rustin, George C. Wolfe, call me back." And I did, and said yes basically on the spot, and it was a pretty easy call to President and Mrs. Obama to say, we found something and we think you should read it, and can I tell you this story? And President Obama goes, I know this story. We're in.
But what is so fascinating about this film is there's so much story to tell with him. He's not just one thing. Yes, he's this activist, but he's so much else. And you do an amazing job of balancing all those things. But how difficult was that when you were creating the structure of the film?
I don't know. I wanted, the thing which was fascinating to me, that he was a Quaker. That was really interesting, that he was Northern, that he wasn't, so many of the civil rights leaders were Southern and Baptist, and heterosexual, allegedly. No, I'm saying I'm not starting anything, and so that was really interesting. And so I was really fascinated by that, and that he was and once again, the shifting of the landscape became really interesting to me. And then the realization that the March on Washington, this monumental thing, was organized in 8 weeks. And so what ended up happening is these various sort of vice scripts kept on revealing themselves. 8 weeks to plan the march. Oh, and then this happens, and then there's Storm Thurmond keep on saying crap and trying to disrupt it, and he's a pawn of J. Edgar Hoover, and all of, and then so therefore then the Elias character became the alternative to everything that Bayard has worked through. Elias has not even begun the journey. And so he became an interesting dynamic. So it just be finding these elements of the storytelling that were reflective of who he was, so that therefore I didn't want anything to feel forced. And so he's going back to make amends with his dear friend who betrayed him. And that was thrilling, because you get to meet Martin Luther King in process of becoming the extraordinary human being that he was going to become. And all these people were in process, and Adam Clayton Powell was this brilliant congressman, but he's also a politician. So he's going to do strategy. So all these, the secrets and the structure kept sort of revealing itself in some interesting ways. So nothing, there were things that I knew I wanted to explore, but it kept on, it just kept on revealing, I want to be told. And, you know, for example, Bayard, A. Philip Randolph delivered the march's demands, and it was a list. And as a gesture toward, and a sincere and a deep, real gesture toward Bayard, he, at the last minute, wanted Bayard to read them. So we filmed Bayard reading the demands of the march. And it was good, and it was strong, and Colman was great in it, and the reactions, and we had all sorts of wonderful reactions from it. But it's a list. It didn't have any of Bayard's elegance and wit and poetry to it. And then it became clear to me the most elegant act and the most poetic thing that he could do was what he did, which is pick up trash. And that was something that revealed. So this wonderful moment where he goes, "What do you say?" And he raised two fists. Had to go, you know. So it was just there are things that we loved had to go, and just playing around with. It was strangely organic. The process was strangely organic and weirdly non-forced because of the vice scripts of time that were at play. I don't know if I answered the question, but that was a lot of meandering. Okay.
I mean, this film does not work without the right actor to play Rustin, and I think Colman gives a performance for the ages. Tell me about, well, should we do an applause for Colman? He can't be here. Tell me about that casting process. How hard was it to find the right person, and why was it Colman?
Well, Colman was, his name was mentioned very early on, but once again, I didn't want to, I think I didn't want it to be forced. And so, and I had worked with him, and he and I had started our collaborative dynamic under doing Ma Rainey. So that was then, but so, you know, the script would be changing and evolving, and I go, oh, I could see Colman doing that. And then something else would happen, and I go, oh my God, Colman, that would be really interesting. And so it just, you know, it started about, what about Colman? What about, I don't know, until I found that I hear him. Oh, he should be doing this. And so it grew, the realization that it should be him grew. Now, it may have been Colman sitting at home with some voodoo doll of me, sticking it and going, I'm Rustin. So I said, yeah, it's got to be him. So I have no idea. But it once again, it felt organic, and it felt right when it felt right. And therefore, then probably it was inevitable, but it was fun to pretend that it wasn't.
Tanya, what did you think about Colman? Like, what did he have that you felt like he was the one?
Well, first of all, he and George had worked together before, and as George said, it really was this organic process where we were talking about who was going to play Bayard, But honestly, the whole time we all knew it was going to be Colman. And George would say, I'm hearing Colman in my head as I'm making notes on script, et cetera. And so I can't actually pinpoint a moment when we all, I mean, I guess when we started to make his actor deal, but like there wasn't really a moment when it was a choice. It was, as George said, kind of much more of an inevitability. Colman embodied the role so fully, researched Bayard, met with Bayard's Walter Nagel, who didn't know Bayard during 1963, but they met later, as the Chiron said at the end. Spent a lot of time talking to people who had been part of the organizing committee, the angelic troublemakers. And so whether or not Colman was at home with a voodoo doll, poking it, saying, it's going to be me, it's going to be me. I mean, he might have been. But he certainly was doing the work for years in advance, getting ready for that phone call. And so...
and I think he had been the understudy to in this play by a group called Pomo Afro Homo. You remember them?
Wow.
That I presented at one point at the Public, and I presented the play at the Public, and he was an understudy to that in the San Francisco area. So,
Yeah.
Correct? Am I right? Yeah, because I've had many lives, so but also while that was happening, I was talking to Audra McDonald and said, I want you to do Ella Baker, and I was meeting and I was interviewing and auditioning all the kids who were part of the team. So the world was, everything about the world was organically forming, and people, and Jeffrey Wright, who's a dear friend of mine, I've worked with probably more than any other actor, you're doing Adam Clayton Powell. I said, you're doing Adam Clayton Powell, and then, yes, you are doing it. And so he said, okay, fine. So it's, so it was just the world was forming. And then the center of that world was Colman as well.
It's an incredible ensemble cast. Was there, and it sounds like a lot of the people came to you organically, as you're saying, but was there any role, probably a real life person, that was a struggle to finally nail down the right person?
I don't know. Was it?
Yes, I will. I'll jump in here because George does 2 weeks of rehearsal, and this is hugely important to his process, and he will not do a film without that, which means that as a producer, we cannot wait until the very, very last minute to fill a role, because that person has to be, ready to go, and we shot in Pittsburgh, 14 days in advance, no matter what. And so all of these roles were filled. Audra McDonald had committed, Jeffrey Wright, obviously Colman. We found Gus. But actually finding Elias was really tricky. It was really complicated. And George and our brilliant casting director, A.V. Kaufman, had looked at, I don't know how many people, but it felt like hundreds until you found Johnny Ramey.
Yeah, and it's something about him, and there was something that I wasn't sure that was right about the two of them playing together, which made me excited about the two of them playing together. Because if they fit together effortlessly, it would be wrong. Because in many respects, that relationship, they both make a decision to make that relationship be real, because the Elias character isn't ready to go on any journey with anybody at all. And to me, and one of the things which I think is brilliant is Elias is very skilled at getting people who are more evolved than him to want to rescue him. He did that with his wife, and now he's doing the same thing with Bayard. And so that kind of meandering manipulation, if you will, I'm here and I'm present, but I'm going to manipulate you to fall in love with me. You know, it's something, and I felt something, and I know he was a very skilled actor and a very well-trained one, so it's something about it. I knew it was right, and it was very interesting. When we did the camera test, the wig that they put on him was so completely wrong, and it was just wrong, and so
It looked like a rat.
it was horrible, and you know, with all due respect, it just wasn't. And then I gave some notes, and then they reshaped it. Film is just so weird because I knew he was right, but I didn't know. And then he put on the wig, and then they didn't belong together, and then they cut the wig, and something changed completely and totally about his look, and then they instantly were perfect together. It was one of them. It was really a weird process, but they worked beautifully together. And you want something to work that you know is doomed, you know. And so that was one that just was. It took a while to deliver on itself, but it delivered on itself. And then when they filmed, I think the first thing they filmed were their bar scenes together, and you just, this energy was all of a sudden there. I mean, we had been rehearsing and doing a lot of stuff, but all of a sudden, it was crackling the way it needed to be.
And I want to talk about the March on Washington because it is something that so many people know and are familiar with. What was most difficult about making that a reality production-wise for you, Tanya, and for directing those scenes?
COVID.
I mean, it was very hard. So I will set it up, and then I'll let George answer about creatively and artistically. So we went to DC 3 times. COVID shut us down twice. So what that means is that we went to DC with 35 trucks and about 600 crew members and background artists, 350 of whom had been fitted and dressed in period costume. And Tony Leslie James, our costume designer, who was a real stickler for authenticity, that meant that the men were in wool and the women were in something else. I mean, it was hot and horrible. And then COVID happened, and we did that twice. And so, and each time we did it, we all got energetically, psychically, emotionally ready to go, and then didn't. And so after the second time that COVID made it impossible for us to shoot, we went to the National Park Service and we said, we really need to finish the movie. Can you give us another date 10 days from now? And the National Park Service said no. And because of the number of other productions that this had happened to, we had to wait 6 months almost to shoot it. Now, that's horrible, but what it did was it enabled George to cut the movie, except for the third act, completely. So by the time we got there in the middle of August, shooting at the national monuments, almost the exact same window that Bayard and everybody else was there, the entire movie was finished, saved for this part, and George knew exactly what he wanted. And then we got there and it was warm.
Warm and in wool. Yeah.
Warm and wool, exactly. Yeah, and also it really was unbelievably hot, but also what we had done, we had built the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Pittsburgh. So all the major speeches were done in a controlled environment on a freezing day in Pittsburgh, freezing day. So all the I Have a Dream and Mahalia and all the moments and the looks and all that whole dynamic that existed, we were able to do in a quasi-controlled, albeit a frozen one, dynamic. So we had all of that, but we didn't have the scale. And that's what was really thrilling to play around with. One of my favorite shots is is when they're setting up and Bayard is coming down the steps and he says the line, "God, I hope they show up today." It's as if I said to Branford, I said, it's as if the steps of the Lincoln Memorial are the white keys on a piano. And so can you do something there? So when he's coming down at that moment, you hear the piano going, da 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 da. That's a little thing, makes me happy. But anyway, it was brutally hot. It was so brutally hot. Dr. Anna almost fainted. But it was also something so thrilling being in that space, because to me one of the things is interesting. What was most interesting to me is I remember having a conversation with Arthur Gelb, who was the cultural editor of the Times, and he said, "I remember being in Times Square in the 60s and the 70s and seeing policemen go up to black men and with their billy clubs hit them on the back of their thighs, saying, 'Get out of here, you don't belong here.'" And I was thinking also about, you know, the journey of black people throughout Manhattan before ending up in Harlem, but also the gay community was relegated all the way over to the sides, to the shadows and of the bars on the west side. So to me, the film journeys from the black and gay equation existing in the shadows till finally, and DC was a segregated city in 1963. So that finally, that moment of arriving in DC was the payoff of another sort of subliminal storytelling equation that was part of the film, which is claiming the streets and in the sun. Claiming the streets so that therefore you own the, you know, so that all those people coming in, black, white, coming in from all over the country, they're reclaiming and redefining the nation's capital in that moment. And so that was one of the fascinating things about playing. And those beginning scenes at the very end with the girl with the ketchup, they were filmed in this diner that was segregated at the time. And so it really is a journey about who owns the streets. Who owns the streets? We all own the streets. And if we all don't own the streets, then the streets aren't right. And so that was one of the things that I really loved about being able to have that sense of scale, and plus finding the archival footage, which we then colorized, and then had to figure out how to make sure that what we had filmed and what existed were matching, and all of those little fun details were just really fascinating. But also just to see, you know, the pride in the faces from 1963 and trying to match that as well.
We're somehow almost out of time, but I was hoping you both could kind of wrap up with what you learned in the process of making this, what you learned from Bayard that you hope audiences kind of walk away with after they see the film.
Oh my goodness. What Bayard, you know, you finish a project and it's done, and part of you is relieved that you made it out, you know, and hopefully it's good and you still have a brain, and so you want to move on. And I find with this film, I'm still wearing him in a way that I'm very happy about, because in part of, you know, it's in part of what's going on in the country right now. We're going to rewrite history. No, you're not. You don't get to do that, because the people, you know, I wish Bayard was still alive because we need him right now. You know, you know, and you realize that this, you know, this man, like, you know, when he was 16 and 17, he was leading protests, you know, in Westchester, Pennsylvania, and it wasn't something that struck him. He made a life investment in it, and the understanding that he understood democracy is an ongoing, perpetual investment. And the fact that I think he understood that so much, that's crystallized in my brain in a very, very specific scientific way. That just as much as I invest in, telling stories and making films or doing plays or putting on a musical, that I am required as a citizen of the world and a citizen of this country to perpetually invest as much as I can in making sure that the muscle of democracy does not wilt and does not, So that responsibility it's always been there, but it's magnified in a way that I'm very happy about.
I don't know how you follow that
I'm not
up.
following that. It was a profound experience, truly. It was, to make a film that makes you believe. And
Those are the last two lines
it made me
of the
believe.
film.
Let's leave it there.
We shall overcome someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe. That's, not the rest of it. We shall overcome some. Deep in my heart, I do believe. And that's what that the kid says makes you want to believe. And is that sense that that's what democracy is. It's not the complete fulfillment of it. It's the investment in it. So I'm sorry, but you know what I mean?
George Wolfe, thank you all for coming tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.